This is Robert Murphy, and I'm an economist with the Austrian School of Economics. And I just want to explain a few facts about the debate over the debt ceiling and why I don't think that Congress should raise the debt ceiling. First of all, it's important to distinguish between paying interest on the existing debt and raising the ceiling, because people like Treasury Secretary Geithner and others in this debate try to make the public think that the two are the same thing, so that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then necessarily that means we're defaulting on our obligations. And that's simply not true. Currently, the federal government takes in enough receipts month after month to not only pay the existing interest on the debt, but also to fund all sorts of other things. So right now, the revenues coming in, only about 1/6 of them would be needed in order to make the explicit interest payments on the outstanding debt. So when the government says, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we're going to have to default on our debt, that's not because of accounting. That's because that would be their choice. They have plenty of money coming in the door with which to pay the existing creditors. It's just what do they choose to do with that money. Now, as far as what sort of cutbacks would be necessary, it's true. The government right now is planning on spending about $1.5 trillion more this fiscal year than they're going to take in revenue. And so if they can't raise the debt ceiling, then obviously that's going to put a crimp in their plans. But the point is, in order to cut back, it's not as if the government would have to go on this draconian budget cutting spree. They would just have to go back to the spending levels in about 2002 or 2003. So just going to repeat that. If the government went back to the budget that it had as late as 2002 or 2003, then it would be able to live off of the revenues currently coming in, and it wouldn't need to raise taxes. It wouldn't need to raise the debt ceiling. The last point I want to make is that even if we say, oh, that's politically impossible, the government couldn't possibly cut back spending to the levels of 2002 or 2003, because that would involve more than $1 trillion in cuts this year alone. That's impossible. Okay, fine. There's a way to get out of this mess without raising taxes, without raising the debt ceiling, and without even cutting spending the full amount it would need to be right away. And that solution would be for the government to sell off some of its assets. So right now, the federal government is sitting on a huge stockpile of assets that have a market value that it could sell off in order to get over this hump while they bring spending down to match the revenues at that point, so that we don't need to raise taxes and we don't need to raise the debt ceiling. Just to give some examples, right now, according to the government's own estimates, so I'm relying here on the government's own figures, it has what's called international reserve assets, meaning things like other currencies, swap agreements with other central banks, and of course the big stockpile of gold that they claim they're still sitting on. If you value that at market prices, it's about $525 billion. They also claim to have what's called credit market instruments, which includes things like student debt, student loans that the government's sitting on, and the remainder of the TARP program, the assets that it's sitting on, those sorts of things, that are valued at $786 billion. Recently, the Obama administration sold off some of its strategic petroleum reserves, so that's stockpiles of crude oil sitting in salt caverns in the southern United States. The remainder of that, right now, if they sold all that off, would pull in about $52 billion. Right? So if you go through and add up all these things, these big-ticket items that the government currently owns, they could easily pull in enough revenue from the sale of those things to get by without raising the debt ceiling, without raising taxes, and eventually the ultimate solution would be to cut spending. So in conclusion, I just want to say that the numbers are not forcing this position. It is a political choice. The government doesn't want to cut its spending. It likes things the way they are, and it's trying to scare the American public into thinking that financial Armageddon will occur unless we allow them to borrow trillions more dollars than they're able to take in through taxes. And that's simply not true. In fact, it's the opposite. The only way we're ever going to get out of this financial mess is if the government starts living within its means, and the best way to do that is right now when the public has its attention, and this is really a hot-button political issue. So people should urge their representatives not to raise the debt ceiling. Thank you.